Have you ever felt misunderstood, misrepresented? That people kind of look at you one way, but they're not really seeing the whole picture, and their interpretation of you maybe is not the best representation of who you really are. It could be something small, it can be something big, but either way, I think all of us have felt to some degree that people don't exactly see us for who we truly are. And they only see us maybe on the surface, or their interpretation and understanding of what our position or role or personality might reveal, without really getting to know us. And so then their expectations of who we are and what we're all about, maybe are different from the reality of who we are and what we're all about. That can be somewhat frustrating for a lot of us to feel that misunderstanding, that people aren't seeing us for who we are, seeing our heart behind why we say things, why we do things, and it can frustrate us. And we want to be understood. We want people to understand us. In fact, it's a lot of the reason why there's so much conflict is because we're trying to be understood, and others aren't necessarily trying to understand us because they want us to understand them. And so we have to stop and really just get to know each other for who we really are, who we truly are. And what's frustrating too is then when we're going about, and this is where gossip can be very destructive, is where when we're going about and we hear other people who have a preconceived idea about who we are without really getting to know us because they actually heard about us through somebody else. And that somebody else maybe had misrepresented who we are to this person or these people. And so there's this misunderstanding, this misrepresentation of who we are, and people start approaching us a little bit differently, maybe because of their preconceived ideas of maybe what our title, position, role, or personality has been portrayed in other instances or other interpretations, or what other people have said about us. This is frustrating. And yet, we're not alone in this frustration. I think that we make that same mistake with Jesus all the time. We misinterpret Jesus, and because of our misinterpretation of him, we also misrepresent him to others. And then their interpretation of him can be kind of skewed as well. So we're not alone in this, because Jesus himself experiences this. And I say experiences because I'm not thinking this is just a biblical problem where it happened back then, but I think it's still happening today, where our understanding and expectations of who Jesus is and what he's all about is kind of obscured by our own preconceived ideas of seeing maybe just him on the surface and not really getting to know him deep down to understand who he is and what he's truly all about. And as a result, we misrepresent him. This is not just a problem with maybe any new believers. This isn't just a problem with non-believers. I think this is a problem of the church, and we can see that all throughout the centuries of the church. I mean, I think the Crusades, that's one example of how we've misinterpreted some things and misrepresented the church and Jesus. That's just one extreme example, but I think we still make this mistake today. Again, not only are we not alone in being the ones who are misrepresented or misunderstood, we're also not alone in being the ones who misunderstand and misrepresent. We see it happening in Scripture itself. We see the apostles or the disciples, they didn't really understand Jesus, and they weren't getting it. They were only seeing him on the surface level with their preconceived ideas of what his title or role or position represented. They didn't really have the full picture, and they just kind of took Jesus at face value of, well, we know who you are and what you're here to do, and yet they didn't really get to know him deep down beyond their preconceived ideas, to know what he was truly all about. We see this in Mark chapter 8, which is where we're at in our continuing of the series. As we read through Mark chapter 8, and this week we read in verses 22, but today we're going to pick up, we're going to start off in verse 27. And in verse 27, Mark chapter 8, verse 27, we see Jesus ask this question to the disciples. He says to them, "Who do people say that I am?" He wants to know how he's being interpreted. And the disciples responded. They said, well, some people are saying that you're John the Baptist. Actually, we saw that earlier, right? King Herod thought that Jesus was John the Baptist, come back to life, maybe to haunt him sort of thing, after what Herod did to John the Baptist. But so we know already, people thought he was John the Baptist. And that's what the disciples say. Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're Elijah. And others still, they think that you're one of the prophets. And Jesus takes that information. Oh, okay. And what about you? What do you guys say about me? Who do you think that I am? And this is where often when we talk about this passage, we're like, yeah, everybody else, they don't get it, but the disciples, they get it. Because Peter's, he pipes up. He speaks on their behalf. And he says, you are the Christ. And right away we're like, see, Peter gets it. Peter, he gets it. He can see that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Hebrew word for Christ, all meaning the same thing. And that carries on this idea that one day someone is coming to deliver us from the evil that's around us. Specifically in the Jewish mindset, they're thinking not only coming to save the world, but coming and using the nation of Israel to do that, which means destroying their enemies in the process as well, or freeing them specifically from Caesar and the Roman occupation. That's the idea, is that there's one superpower in the world right now. His name's Caesar. And now Jesus is supposed to come. And the Messiah is supposed to come. The Messiah is supposed to kick Caesar off the throne, and Israel will be restored back to its proper glory, so that they can be the ones, and God through them can be the ones to save the rest of the world and free the rest of the world, sort of thing, from the enemy, which they understood the supernatural going on there. But their view of that was very limited still. But that's their interpretation. That's what Peter says when he says, you are the Christ. So we think they're right. Jesus is the Christ. But Jesus strictly tells them, don't repeat this to anyone. Don't repeat this to anyone. Don't tell anybody what you just told me. Why? Why does Jesus not want others to know? Why does he not want others to know that he is the Christ or the Messiah? It's because what that title brings. It's because of what's being interpreted when they hear that message, that, hey, the Messiah is here. They're going to think the same way Peter did. Now, you're reading this and you're like, well, we don't really get to see what Peter thinks. He just says that he's the Messiah, he's the Christ, and that Jesus says, don't tell anybody about this. So how do we know that Jesus is afraid that Peter's going to go misrepresent him somehow? Well, we find that out in the next part of the reading as we continue in chapter 8. And so I'm going to read this and then let's talk about it. Verse 31 says that he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. So Peter says, you're the Messiah. And Jesus is like, yep, you're right. Don't tell anybody that though, because you're not really getting what the Messiah is all about. Let me tell you. So Jesus tells him what the Messiah is all about. The Messiah, we find out here that the Messiah is the Son of Man, which is directly linked to the Messiah in the Old Testament. We see that Daniel speaks of the Son of Man, so this is something the prophets have been speaking about. So he's introducing a different idea, though, that they wouldn't have thought of, because he says he's the Son of Man and that he must suffer, that it must be rejected, that he must be killed, and that he must rise. He must rise again after 3 days. And he just says it plainly. Plainly, because to Jesus it was plain. This is what it really means. You guys haven't been getting it for so long, but this is what it really means. And so he speaks plainly. Peter responds, and this is where we see Peter doesn't get it. Peter doesn't get it. We see that Peter says that Mark says that Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. To rebuke Jesus. Now to you, that word might just seem like, okay, so he rebuked him. We use that word from time to time, or we see that word throughout Scripture from time to time. But actually, so far with Mark, the only time we're seeing this word rebuke is when Jesus is casting out demons. So far, it's a strong word. Mark's using this word in his writing as a very strong word, but a very serious thing. This isn't something to be taken lightly. And now we're seeing Peter rebuking Jesus, this strong correction, this whoa. I think you're missing something here, Jesus. I don't think you understand what the Messiah is. And so if you want to be the Messiah, that's cool. We believe you're the Messiah, but you got to make sure you're on the right track of what Messiah is all about, what the Christ is all about. So there's Peter rebuking Jesus. Have any of you rebuked Jesus before? Have any of you told God where maybe he's got it wrong, where he's misinterpreted something, where he is kind of running the world wrong? I've been there. If you listen to my story last week, I've been there where I myself have kind of rebuked God. Not a fun thing to do, not a smart thing to do, to try and tell the Almighty that he's made a mistake, that he's doing something wrong, that there's another way if he would just do it our way. That's what Peter's trying to understand to Jesus. Now we're starting to understand why Jesus didn't want the disciples spreading the news of a Messiah, because they would have been rallying an army. They wouldn't have been rallying followers. Or servants. These people wouldn't have been coming to Jesus in submission to him as king. They'd have been coming ready in submission to him as general, as ready to take on the Roman occupation, and not to submit to him and recognize within themselves that things had to change. So Peter is told not to tell people because of this very reason. He's got the wrong idea. So Jesus turns and he sees his disciples. Notice that he's looking at the rest of them too, not just Peter. So the rest of the disciples are probably elbowing each other like, yeah, Peter's got this right. Peter will set him straight. He's looking at the rest of the disciples, and he looks to Peter and he says, and he rebukes Peter now, the same way that he rebuked the demons, the same way Peter just tried to rebuke him. He rebukes Peter. Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Read Matthew chapter 4. Jesus does the same deal when he's up against the devil himself. The devil's trying to tempt him to do the same thing that Peter's trying to tempt him to do. Peter doesn't realize he's just going off of his understanding of what Messiah is. But what his understanding of Messiah is the exact same plan that the enemy has for the world. This plan to just keep us fighting against one another and not face the real enemy. So Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God. You're setting your mind on the things of man. You're only seeing the small picture here. You're not seeing the big picture." So Jesus rebukes Peter, tells him that there's a greater evil that you're not aware of. After he rebukes Peter, he calls the disciples, he gathers the crowd, a crowd around him, and he says, "Look, let me explain to you a little bit about Messiah." He says in verse 34, calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." That's the call. He's inviting them to follow him again. He'd invited them to follow. Remember at the beginning of Mark, he invites Peter and Andrew, James and John. Later on, he invites Levi. There's a specific invitation, and the words he says are, "Follow me." Follow me. And for the first invitation, he says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." So there's this invitation to follow me. But so far, what we're realizing here with Peter and the other disciples, they're following Jesus based on their understanding of who he is. They're following Jesus because of their expectations of what he's going to do, not the reality of what he's going to do. They're following Jesus because of what they think he can do for them, but not in light of what he ultimately wants to do for the world and for each of us. And they don't see that for them, the Messiah is coming to free them from the Roman occupation, the evil that surrounds them. But they don't see that Jesus is also coming to free them from the evil that is within them. And to do that, they need to also deny themselves. He says, deny themselves, pick up their cross, and follow him. This was a strong term. For us, we get it. We get the cross because we've read to the end of the book. We know Jesus died on the cross. The disciples, at this moment, they still are thinking cross as punishment. Cross as capital punishment. That's it. For them, this is a Roman tool. But Jesus is introducing, saying, wait, you want us to pick up our cross? He's saying that I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be rejected, I'm going to be killed, and I'm going to rise again. If you want to follow me, do the same. You're going to have to deny yourself. You're going to have to pick up your cross. You're going to have to endure this suffering in this world, because the fight that we're going up against, it's actually not against flesh and blood. It's not. Caesar is not the only problem here. There's a bigger problem. I'm coming to deal with that problem. And I'm calling you to deal with that problem with me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. This is what Jesus responds to them, and it might seem frustrating and kind of abstract, really, to see where is he coming from. What is all of this? Why such a big deal? All Peter was saying was, hey, there could be another way. And Jesus is saying, no, you're only seeing the things of man here. You're only seeing in terms of this life now, but you don't see the big picture that goes all the way back from the beginning and reaches to the end of the age. You're not seeing that picture. And I'm here for that. I'm here to deal with that. I'm here to deal with death and evil and sin. I'm here to deal with all of these things, not just Caesar, not just the Roman occupation, not just what's going to be good for Peter, not just what's going to be good for the disciples, but what's good for all of us. What is good for humanity, for creation? Jesus has a lot bigger picture in mind. And in fact, he's now inviting us to be part of that as well. He's calling us to submit to him as King, as Messiah, as God. Not simply as general to go up against things that oppose us here that we can see, but that we are following him to eradicate the evil that is even within each of us. Which is why we also need then to deny ourselves. Following Jesus means that what we're doing is saying no to our way, just like Peter had his way of doing things. We're saying no to our way, and we're saying yes to God's way, which was the very problem we had in the garden, where we did the exact opposite. In the garden, and actually I was talking to a teen this week, and he says, man, Adam and Eve really screwed it up for us, didn't they? They really, if they hadn't have eaten that fruit, if they hadn't have taken the fruit from the tree, they really would have messed it up wouldn't have messed it up for us, and we wouldn't have all the problems we have today. And yeah, he's right. However, the problem is, each of us would have made the same decision in the garden had we been given the chance. Because the struggle has always been between what I think is right and wrong versus what God thinks is right and wrong. And that evil comes a lot deeper than just the decisions of others around me, but it's even from within me and the enemy that we don't see. Ephesians chapter 6, it tells us, Paul writes in that letter to the Ephesians, and he says, remember this, your fight's not against flesh and blood. No, it's against all the principalities of the enemy. The enemy is not the flesh and blood. It's the rulers and the principalities in the spiritual realm. It's the sinfulness that even takes place within us that's influenced by that decision that we made in the garden, that we made every day, making the same decision that, hey, I'm going to decide what's right from wrong, what's good versus evil for myself, rather than trusting in what Jesus says is right and wrong. So to follow Jesus means that we have to deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and follow him. That's what he's calling us to. Not just follow him into this battle against our enemies, but recognizing that the battle is a lot bigger than just what we see. This is a fight for humanity, not just a fight for us and the people we care about, but it's a fight for all of us. And it goes a lot deeper than just us versus Caesar. It goes a lot deeper than that. It's something that is even that Caesar needs deliverance from. And so Peter, after rebuking Jesus, he gets rebuked himself. And he's told, just like the enemy was told, no, you get away. You're tempting me here. You step back. Specifically, Jesus is telling him, get behind me, which is what follow me means, right? Follow me. He's saying, get behind me. Get in line with what I'm doing. And where I'm going, the direction I'm taking right now is to Jerusalem, where I'm being waited for right now, where we're actually, as we approach, I know that's where I will meet my death. I know that's where I'll meet my suffering. I know that's where I'm going to meet my rejection. And I'm telling you, if you want to follow me, if you want to actually, if you would come after me, if you would have life, if you want to gain your soul, not lose your soul, then follow me there. Get behind me there. That's the direction we're going. Take up your cross, because that's where the real fight is going to be. This applies to us today. And a lot of us, we have this idea that, once we accept Jesus, and if just everybody else would just accept Jesus, then the world is going to be a lot better place, and which isn't wrong. But then we have this idea that, well, there's going to be just no more disease anymore. We're not going to be sick anymore. There's not going to be suffering. Good people aren't going to die. When we pray for healing, it's just going to happen like that. That's the mentality that we somehow get. You ask and you'll receive. And there's this idea of continued prosperity. We're going to get rich. We have this misconception. We see it. It's bombarded in our televangelists and all kinds of things that give us this wrong impression of what the kingdom of heaven really is. So we've misrepresented the Messiah even today, even after he went to the cross. Because why? Because we're trying to use the Messiah to accomplish what we think should be done, just like Peter was trying back then. And we're rebuking God, saying, well, hey, this is actually the better way of doing it. God's like, no. If you want to follow me, actually, get in line behind me. Pick up your cross. Let's head to Jerusalem together. Deny yourself. Because the evil we're fighting isn't just against flesh and blood. It isn't just whether you're wealthy or poor. It's not about whether you're healthy or sick. That's not the real evil that we're fighting. The real evil that we're fighting against, that's the enemy. That's the enemy in the spiritual realm that's been influencing your thoughts, that's been influencing your sin, that's led you to think that you can decide for yourself what's right or wrong. And here I'm saying, give all that up. Follow me. Trust in me. We all hate being misunderstood. We all hate being misrepresented. And even if you're listening to what I'm saying, and you're like, I don't know if that's really what the gospel is all about, or I'm not really sure if that's what Jesus is all about or who he is, that's okay. My challenge to you is this. Just as much as you hate being misrepresented, misunderstood, misinterpreted, don't make the same mistake as Peter did. Don't make the same mistake people make with you to Jesus. But let's take some time to really, truly get to know who he is and what he's all about. And once we do that, I guarantee you're going to realize that we need to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and get in line behind him, follow him. This is a hard message, and the disciples had to make this decision, and they don't get it. In fact, in chapter 9, we're going to see Peter still doesn't get it. And in fact, all throughout the rest of the 8 chapters we're going to read through in Mark, they don't get it. So there's some comfort in that as we read that, hey, they didn't get it and they were with the man himself. We are still not going to get it right away. But here's what the disciples did do. They didn't give up on Jesus. They continued to press in and to learn and to seek his will. And they might have still tried to impose theirs, but when it came down to it, they continued to seek after him. And it took some time. In fact, it wasn't until after the resurrection, perhaps even not until after the day of Pentecost, where we see that they truly finally start to get it. So we can take comfort in this. Don't just walk away because you feel frustrated or confused, but join us on this journey as we continue to press in, get to know Jesus for who he really is, and follow him. God bless your week. We'll see you whenever.